had a true story that's going to totally mess with your mind. Okay, so it's 1705 in Canterbury, England. There's this woman, her name is Mrs. Bargrave, and she's just chilling at home. I don't know what people did in 1705, probably just drinking her version of medieval tea or something. All of a sudden, there is a knock at her door. She goes to her door. It's this old-time friend that she had named Mrs. Veal. Now, she has not seen this friend in like years. So Mrs. Bargrave is like happy to see Mrs. Veal, right? But Mrs. Veal is acting a little weird. Instead of like doing the whole pleasantries of, oh, hey, how are you? Da, 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 da. She literally just like walks in, takes a seat, and starts talking about some strange stuff. Mrs. Veal starts talking about death and what happens after you die. And she starts talking about the soul and referencing books about the afterlife. So Mrs. Bargrave is just kind of going along with this, like, okay, I guess this is what we're talking about. This is weird. All of a sudden, Mrs. Veal stands up. It's like she realized her oven was still on or something. And she's just like, I have other visits I have to do today. And Mrs. Bargrave is like, okay, like, who are you visiting? Mrs. Bargrave offers to walk Mrs. Veal out. She's like, here, let me walk you out. And Mrs. Veal's like, no need. Mrs. Veal kind of just leaves and she's gone. And it's like, okay, that's weird, but whatever. The next day now it gets even crazier. Mrs. Bargrave is out and about and she runs into like a neighbor and she's just chatting with the neighbor and she tells her, oh, Mrs. Veal came to visit me yesterday and, you know, we were just chatting and nothing crazy. Her neighbor's friend just like her face just like drops and her neighbor says, that's not possible. Mrs. Bargrave's like, why? And she says, Mrs. Veal died yesterday. Not like sick in bed. Not like, oh, she was dead and nobody knew. No, 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 no. Her funeral was already fully planned. So, of course, Mrs. Bargrave's sitting there like, what? Here's the kicker. Mrs. Bargrave described what Mrs. Veal was wearing, and that was the exact same outfit that she was getting buried in. But nobody had seen her in it before she died. I guess some friendships transcend death. Do you believe in ghosts?